So bringing it back again to what I was talking about earlier with how do we represent our different types of data. So how do we represent categorical data? We represent it in a two-way frequency table. So we have an example of one of these here. One thing that I want to draw your attention to as well is the word two in the title, two-way frequency table. That's actually not referring to the fact of like how many columns or how many rows there are. We could actually have multiple columns or multiple rows and still have it be called a two-way frequency table. It's a two-way frequency table because it goes two ways. We can kind of read down and across it both ways, and by doing that we can actually draw meaningful results. So like I said earlier, instead of just having a whole list of this year 11 voted yes, this year 11 voted no, this year 12 voted yes, like that actually doesn't help us be able to interpret the data. But when we tally it up and put it in a two-way frequency table, we're then actually able to draw meaningful relationships from that, because now we can interpret it now that it's in this much easier form. And just like what I was saying, like there actually does seem to be an association. So let's say, for example, this data is about whether year 11 or 12s are for or against phone use at school. So here we could see that 36% of year 11s are for phone use at school, while 64% are against it. And even there, by using that language intentionally, even just by using that adjoining word while, I'm really intentionally comparing them and like contrasting and discussing the difference between it and drawing a conclusion from that, which would be that if we're looking at year 11s seem more likely to be against phone use at school. Whereas, another connecting word you can use if you're asked to discuss a two-way frequency table, whereas, so I'm pointing out that there's actually a difference here. In year 12s, we actually see the opposite thing. It would be more like 81% of year 12s are for phone use. So we can already start to see a really strong pattern emerging there. Another quick thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that this two-way frequency table has already been converted to percentages for the columns, whereas in a two-way frequency table you often might see the individual number of votes in like each column, and then you'll have the raw total number here, and then also the totals here and here. But what they've done to this two-way frequency table is they've actually converted it to percentages so that we can compare our value on equal footings. Because if we had interviewed a different number of year 11s and 12s, then it wouldn't be it wouldn't be fair to compare the raw numbers, but by converting it to percentages, we can compare it on equal footing. So that's important to note as well. Another quick hint, if you do struggle with, because it can be quite a tricky thing, with drawing conclusions from two-way frequency tables and figuring out how to kind of communicate that in an exam, for example, teal or peel or a similar paragraph structure along those forms can be a really helpful scaffolding guide. And again, that's not like a rigid, you must include each of these elements, but for myself personally, that really helped me like remember each of the important elements I'd have to include in my answer if I was asked to draw a conclusion about a two-way frequency table. So for example, just to break it down a bit further, it would be topic sentence, evidence, explain, linking sentence. The main kind of takeaway from that is you need to make sure you're stating your point really clearly. You're not just restating numbers from the table. You're not just saying 36% of year 11 students. That's actually not drawing a conclusion. You actually want to draw that information out further. You want to make a point that's explicitly responding to whatever the question is asking you. And then you need to take that evidence from the table to back it up so that your marker knows that you do understand what's going on in the table. And then you make a point about it, elaborate if you need to, and then link it back to the question if you need to as well. So that's just one little quick helpful guide. But yeah, I think could possibly help some people if you're looking for a bit of a structure to help you when writing reports about two-way frequency tables. Whereas when we have numerical data, we actually represent it in a scatter plot. We actually don't use a two-way frequency table. One thing that I find quite interesting when we're thinking about just why we use it for either, imagine if we were going to have a two-way frequency table for something, for a numerical variable, example, temperature. So I said earlier that we actually could have multiple columns, but imagine how many columns we'd need if this top variable was temperature. We'd need like 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, 37.54, 38.97. We could just end up with an almost infinite amount of columns because of the very nature of the data, because numerical data is continuous. So it actually doesn't make sense. It's not practical to record it.